Thank you all for coming, and hope you had a good Ben Zmanim. Welcome back to the Vaad. We're going to continue the theme that we've been discussing last couple of times on Shalom Bayis. And for tonight, I want to learn a Mishnah with the Olim, if that's okay with you. This is a Mishnah in Moed, but the lesson in the Mishnah I think is so nogeya to Shalom Bayis that it really could also be in Nashim as well. Now, before we begin the Mishnah, I just wanted to be makdim a couple of sentences from Rabbi Dr. Abraham Twersky's, one of his recent books, Messages from the Mishnah. If you don't have it, you should. It's a lovely sefer, and I just want to read from that as a little hakdamah to the Mishnah. He writes as follows: we can enhance the study of Mishnah by accessing the Agoda within. The Hebrew letters of Mishnah, Mem, Shin, Nun, and Hey, can be rearranged to spell Neshama. Nun, Shin, Mem, and Hey. That is why it is customary to learn Mishnah L'ilui Nishmas, for the elevation of the soul of a departed. Obviously, the halacha in the Mishnah also impacts on the Neshama. However, this is the important point. Mining the Musar in the Mishnah enhances its relationship to the Neshama. So tonight, I'd like to mine a little Musar from one Mishnah in Yana Diyom in Rosh Hashanah. The Mishnah says as follows: Ketzid Bodkin Esa Edim. How is the Bezdin interrogating the witnesses that came to proclaim the new moon, that they saw the new moon? Zug Sheba Rishon Bodkin Oso Rishon. The first pair, the first kat of Edim, were taken in first, and they were examined first. Machnisin Esa Godol Shebehen. They took the greater one, whoever was considered greater of the two, and they brought him individually first to be interrogated. For Omrim Lo, Emor. They said to him, go ahead, speak, tell us. Ketzad Re'isas Levana. How did you see the Levana? Tell us what it looked like. Lefnei Achama or La'achar Achama. Was the dark side of the moon facing the sun, or was it away from the sun? Now, obviously, if they said it was facing the sun, they were lying, because that's the impossibility. L'tzafona or L'droma. Did you see it in the northern sky and the southern sky? Kama haya gavoa. How high did it appear from the horizon? And which way were the points of the crescent facing? In which direction? All this was to determine if they were telling the truth. How wide was it between the 2 points of the crescent? If they said the dark side of the moon was facing the sun, the testimony was worthless. It was as if they said nothing. And after they examined the first witness, they brought in the second witness, Ubokan also, and they interrogated him as well. If the two testimonies were identical, were equal to each other, Edusin Kayemis, their testimony was established. Ushar Kalazugos Sholanoso Rosh Dvarim. Now they didn't need any more witnesses. If they had a kat that testified unanimously and gave the correct testimony, then they only needed them. However, the Mishnah says that the other witnesses, they were also asked. Sholanoso Rosh Dvarim. They wouldn't go into such depth with the other witnesses, but they'd question them briefly a little bit, just the Rosh Dvarim. Lo shahayit tzrichim lahem. It's not that they needed the other witnesses. They had the testimony already. They could proclaim the new moon. Mekudesh, Mekudesh. It's Rosh Chodesh. Ella, rather, says the Mishnah, Kedei shelo yatsu b'pachei nefesh. We didn't want the other witnesses to leave disappointed. B'shvil sheyu regilim lavo. So they should be accustomed to coming back. Now, the previous Mishnah had said that they used to cater a very large suda for all the witnesses as an incentive. So they should come every time. If they saw the new moon, we wanted as many witnesses to come as possible in case the previous witnesses would be found puzzle. We needed at least one kat to proclaim Rosh Chodesh. Now, obviously, the reason that they were questioned, even if they didn't need them, is to encourage them to come back. However, I think there's a musar in this Mishnah, a very valuable nugget of musar in this Mishnah. Because the Mishnah is saying, if the witnesses came to Beis Din and they didn't have a chance to give their testimony because they weren't needed, they had to go home, they would leave with pachei nefesh. They'd be very disappointed. Now, in order for them to testify, it meant the Beis Din had to stay and interrogate all the witnesses. Now, we're not talking about your local Orthodox rabbi. We're talking about someone in the stature higher even than Rav Chaim Kanievsky Shlita, Rav Aaron Leib Steinman Shlita. These were big people, great Rabbanim. And they could have gone home after they got one kat of Edom that testified correctly. But they stayed. And they interrogated each one of the witnesses, everybody who came. Only Roshei Dvarim, so they shouldn't leave disappointed. Everyone should feel it was worth it that they came, so they'll come again next time. But the Mishnah is teaching us a very important lesson. That when someone has something to say, and they're prepared to say something, now all they were going to say is they saw the new moon. But sometimes people have more important things to say. And if people have important things to say, and no one's going to listen to them, they're going to be disappointed. Now, if this is true for Edom that came to Beis Din to say they saw the new moon, alachas kama v'kama, someone is going to be disappointed if he wants to say something to his b'nei bayis and there's no one listening. And not only the b'nei bayis, alachas kama v'kama, kal v'chomer, and ben beno shel kal v'chomer. If your spouse wants to say something and can't because they don't feel they're being heard and no one's listening, then they're certainly going to be b'pachei nefesh and disappointed. Now, most of you who've been coming here regularly know that I'm a psychotherapist and family counselor, and I see people here in Lakewood as well as my office in Brooklyn. As a matter of fact, a lot of other people know that as well. But it wasn't always like that. And years ago, when I'd go to a simcha and I'd introduce myself to somebody and they'd ask me what I do for a living, and I told them, then invariably the next question I would get is, does that mean you do marriage counseling too? I said, yes, that's one of the things I do. I'm not only a marriage counselor, but I do marriage counseling as well. And invariably I'd be asked another question. The next question I'd be asked would be, tell me, what is the main problem in marriages today? What's the main conflict in marriages today? So I try to be polite, and I finished chewing what I had in my mouth. And before I had a chance to swallow, the person invariably would answer his own question. Oh, I know. It's the in-laws interfering, right? It's the in-laws. That's really what's causes it, isn't it? Isn't that true? And I'd nod and take another bite, because I knew they really weren't interested in hearing what I had to say. They were interested in telling me what they had to say. Now, I didn't have any pachei nefesh. I wasn't disappointed. I wasn't expecting to speak. And sometimes people would say, oh, I know what it is. It's the kids. They're disagreeing about how to handle the kids. That's what it is, right? That's what it is, isn't it? He's too strict. She's too lenient. They can't agree on how to handle the kids. They're fighting about how to handle the kids. That's really what causes all the problems, isn't it? And again, I'd smile and swallow and take another bite. Or sometimes they would say, it's money, right? She spends too much. He doesn't give her enough. They're always fighting about money. Isn't that what it is? Isn't that it? And I would nod again, because they weren't really interested in hearing what I had to say. But if you're here tonight, I think you are interested in what I have to say. Gesundheit. So I'll tell you, yes, couples fight about in-laws interfering, and they have arguments about money, and they disagree on how to handle the children. All that's true. That's the content of the conflict. But what's the cause of the conflict? What's the major cause of the conflict? It's not the money, and it's not the in-laws, and it's not the kids. The cause of the conflict is that at least somebody, and sometimes both, husband and wife, experience pachei nefesh because they don't feel they're being heard at home. They don't feel anyone's listening. They're not communicating well with each other. And that's why they're having arguments and disagreements about the kids, and sometimes about the in-laws or about money. Because they're not communicating well and they're not listening properly to each other. And that causes tremendous pachei nefesh if it happens in a marriage. I want to illustrate this with a case from about 25 years ago, maybe more, I don't remember exactly. I got a call from a younger man, not from Lakewood, from New York. He said he was having trouble with his marriage and he wanted to know if I'd be willing to help him. And he proceeded to tell me that it had gotten to the point where his wife was so fed up with him that she threw him out of the house literally, and he was living with a friend. He wasn't living at home anymore. She insisted that he get out of the house. And he asked if I could help him. And I'll tell you the truth, I didn't feel like a therapist at that point. I felt like a fireman. You know, here it is, the house is practically burned down to the ground, and they're calling me to put out the fire after the house is already burned practically to the ground. So I said to him, quite honestly, I'm sorry, I don't think I'm going to be able to help you, because unless I see you and your wife, there's no way I can help you with your marriage. It doesn't sound to me like she's too interested in reconciling with you if she threw you out of the house. So he said, no, that's not going to be a problem. If she's willing to, she'll be able to come. I can get her to come with me. I said, really? How can you do that? He said, well, after she threw me out of the house, she said marriage is over, she wants a get. So she came to my Rosh Yeshiva, and she asked him, could you help me? I want to get a get. The marriage is over. So my Rosh Yeshiva said to her, oh, I'll help you, but first you've got to go to Meir Wikler. So now I felt I'm on the hot seat here. I have to try to do what I can to save the marriage. And I thought to myself, maybe with the Siyatas Deshmaya of the referral from the Rosh Yeshiva, maybe we could do something. I said, okay. I gave him an appointment. They came in, saw the two of them together, and the husband began speaking first. And he made it very, very clear he's willing to do whatever is necessary. He wants to save this marriage. He wants to reconcile with his wife. He wants to get back. He misses his kids. They had, 4 or 5 kids at that point already. I don't know, they were married at least 15 years. I don't remember the details. But it was something like 4 or 5 kids. And he'll do anything to get back home. She threw him out of the house. And as he's talking, he's very personable. Even had a good sense of humor. And although the subject we were talking about, Rabbosai, was very, very heavy, he presented things in such a light way that I couldn't help chuckling as he was talking. He was entertaining, pleasant fellow. And I'm thinking to myself, why would any woman want to throw this guy out of the house? He seems like such a pleasant guy. I'm relating to him well. He seemed very pleasant and personable. So when he finished, it was the wife's turn. And I asked her, well, tell me what's going on. And she said she had it with him. She was just so frustrated that she just felt she couldn't anymore. It was mayim nafesh. She had to throw him out. I said, well, what is it about your husband that's upsetting you so much? She said she can never get through a conversation with him and express whatever's on her mind, whatever it is, without him interrupting her, assuming that he knew what she meant, and then acting as if he's correct and carrying on the conversation. I know what you're talking about, I know what you mean, and interrupting her. And she just felt she couldn't get through a single conversation with him. It was so frustrating that she couldn't take it anymore. It was mayim nefesh for her, and that's why she felt she had to kick him out of the house. Well, she didn't have to go into any detail to illustrate what she was talking about, because her husband was very obliging in demonstrating exactly what she was talking about in my office. He was interrupting her even while she was speaking and saying, yeah, I know what you mean, I'll change that. And he was demonstrating exactly what she was talking about. I said to him, you're not giving your wife a chance to speak. You're making assumptions that what she's talking about. You have to learn how to listen to her. And then I turned to her and I said, listen, I see what you're talking about. It's very clear to me that you have a serious problem in communication. And your husband never learned how to listen properly, and how to give you the proper attention to make you feel heard. What if I could teach him how to communicate better with you and teach him to be a better listener? Do you think you'd be willing to consider taking him back? She said, well, she'd be willing to consider it, but she certainly wouldn't do it until she saw for herself that he really had changed. So I said, okay, I'm willing to work with you even while you're separated. So what I'm trying to bring out, Rabbosai, is that excuse me? We're not finished yet. I'm not going to leave you hanging. But I was just wanted to emphasize how painful it can be not to be heard and not to be listened to. And I think the message of this Mishnah, the mussar that we can cull from this Mishnah, is that if Eidim are coming to testify they saw the new moon to Beis Din and they're not able to give their testimony and they're going to leave Pachei Nefesh, Allah has kama v'kama, the B'nai Bayis feel much, much worse. Now, I wasn't planning to leave you in suspense. You want to know what happened to the couple. So I started working with them, and I was giving them instructions and guidance and teaching them how to communicate more effectively with each other, both in my office, and then I wanted to do it to practice at home. So I gave them homework. So I remember the husband said to me, listen, he's willing to do the homework. He said, the problem is, he says, but I'm not at home. How can I do the homework if I'm not at home? She won't let me in. I'll move back and we'll do this at home, but she doesn't let me in. And she said, I'm not letting him in until I'm convinced that things are really changed. So I said, well, homework doesn't only have to be done at home. It just has to be done outside of my office. So I said, can you see each other at all outside? Well, there wasn't any other place for them to go, but there was a park near their home. He was living with a friend in the neighborhood. I said, well, then you go to the park, 10 minutes a day, you'll sit on the bench, and you'll practice the exercise that I'm giving you. V'kach hava. They went to the park, they made an appointment, they met outside, they sat on the bench, they did the homework, they came to the office, and after a few months, Baruch Hashem, he got the hang of it. He understood what he was doing wrong. He didn't just apologize, he made the corrections that were necessary. His wife was feeling heard, and Baruch Hashem, I guess in the schus of the Rosh Hashiva, she did allow him to come back. And I haven't heard from them since then. I assume if they had a problem, they would have called me again. But Baruch Hashem, that was many years ago, and I assume that they're still living, I don't know, happily ever after, but they're still living together. But my point, Rabbosai, that I want to stress is that if either spouse or one, even if it's only one spouse, feels they're not being heard, they can't express what they want to. They have something to say and they can't say it. For any reason, either they're afraid, they're intimidated, they don't feel they're being listened to, no one's paying proper attention to them. That is a cause, that is the primary cause. And as the advertisement said, what's the most common cause of conflict in marriages today? That's the most common cause. When someone doesn't feel heard. And the way to correct that is to pay more attention to listening, communicating effectively. If people don't know how to do it, they can learn. It doesn't mean you have to change your total personality. It may mean you have to learn some new communication skills. But it is possible, and it can happen. And it did happen in the case that I illustrated just before. And when people learn to communicate effectively, and they learn to listen properly, and spouses feel heard, then all the other stuff that people think is the main cause of conflict today, whether it's differences in child rearing, financial disagreements, or even in-law interference, it can be handled, it can be resolved, and it can be worked through and reconciled as long as a couple is able to communicate effectively with each other. Just want to announce before we end that if anybody who's watching at home would like to subscribe to the video, you can click down here on the side of the screen, subscribe, and you can have your name added to the email list. If anybody wants to send in questions or comments, you can send them to our email address, which is chinuchvad123@gmail.com, and our very capable coordinator, Reb Gross, will receive those emails and forward them to me. So, and I also want you to know that the next Vaad, B'ezras Hashem, will take place exactly 4 weeks from tonight, which is October 9th, Hadassah Lane Lakewood. So I want to wish you all a Ksiva Slima Tova, a good Gebench Shura, and hopefully we'll meet again in 4 weeks. B'ezras Hashem. For tonight.